We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
If you had the opportunity to go to any planet in the solar system for a galactic conference, which planet would you choose?
The sun.
I don't think the sun is a planet.
I'm just kidding. I honestly... Okay, so to me, they're all just the same wastelands, circle wastelands in the sky. So, I mean, what planet has anything that is worthwhile? I would probably say the moon is not a planet. God damn it.
The moon's a moon.
I know.
I think there's a name for the moon, too. I don't think it's just the moon.
The moon. I think it's literally called a moon. Earth's moon. It's called Earth's moon.
Selene.
It has a name?
Yeah, Selene or Luna.
I was going to say Luna.
Yeah.
Okay. Selene, that's so sweet. All right, well, I have to pick a planet, though. All these freaking planets are exactly the same to
There's
me.
only 8 of them, although at the time there were 9.
True. All right, I'll just pick one. I'm going to say Mercury.
Okay.
Because I like being hot.
Okay. And Mercury is hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mercury
And I think you get
is hot.
squished. I think when you're on it, I think that's one where you're super squished. Because you know how, like, as they go a certain direction, you get more squished or more bouncy?
More squished or more... Are you talking about gravity?
Gravity, yeah. Like the gravity's heavier.
It's the fact that Mercury has less mass than Earth because gravity comes from the mass of the planet. So if you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you only weigh 38 pounds on Mercury. So Mercury makes you bouncy.
Oh.
The bigger the planet, the more gravitational pull it has.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. I would like to be bouncy and hot. I'd be okay with that.
Bouncy and hot.
Yep, that's my reasoning.
Okay.
What about you?
Okay. Let's see. I always thought that Saturn was really cool because it was such a pretty planet. And I'm not saying that as a segue, but I thought that Saturn was pretty cool because it has the rings and stuff.
Yeah.
I would probably hitch a ride along with George Adamski and go to a conference on Saturn.
Ooh, very nice. Is that what he did?
Oh, yes, it is. We're going to talk about that today.
Oh, shit. You know what they probably had at that Saturn at the conference?
What?
A Starbucks. Probably. Because it's a star.
A Starbucks.
Starbucks.
Ah.
Get it? This is like top quality stuff here, guys. I mean...
Well, how did they pay for their coffee?
I don't know. Is there...
With Starbucks.
Oh, man. That was like right there and I didn't take it.
Yeah.
Nice. Next stop, Las Vegas. Stand-up shows.
Yeah. That's my tight 5 seconds.
Yeah. Like, hey guys.
Hey. You go to a Starbucks on Saturn. What do you use to pay for your coffee? Starbucks. It's just the same word repeated over and over
right.
again.
And then you just say that over and over until they start to laugh because maybe they didn't hear you the first time.
Hello? Sorry. Oh, Netflix. Yes, I would like a show. Thank you.
Oh, man, that's great. So why are we talking about Saturn? Because this is the second episode of George Adamski.
Oh, yes.
Where we're going to get into those things, I think. Across the table, we've got Matt.
Hey.
And I'm EJ, of course. And so, yeah, let's jump right into it.
What's the name of our podcast?
Oh, right. We're called Slaying Monsters. I'm sorry, but if you don't know that by now, you've lost. You've taken a left turn.
Yeah, how did you find this?
Yeah.
So today I'll be referencing the article George Adamski, R.E. Straith, and the 7 Letters of Mischief by Curtis Collins, published on the website in honor of Jim Moseley. I'll also be using A Critical Appraisal of George Adamski by Mark Hallett. Now, when we last left former bootlegger and philosopher wannabe George Adamski, his book, The Flying Saucers Have Landed, had become successful enough to grant him a series of traveling lectures. But the public's interest remained focused on the aliens and the saucers, rather than Adamski's more esoteric beliefs, remember? And this bothers him. You know, when he was running the Royal Order of Tibet, he would be talking about all of his universal law, his beliefs about the interconnectedness of things and how we have to work for a peaceful society and love each other and all those things that are actually really, really sweet.
Very nice.
Wonderful ideas.
Yeah.
And people were only coming to him because he was bootlegging wine.
Poor guy.
And I think this bothers him. You know?
We are simple people.
We are. Well, I mean, it was prohibition, dude,
Yeah.
and people got it however they could. Remember the wine bricks that they were like, don't, whatever you do, don't lock this away and let it go for 20 days because you'll end up with wine at that point. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So this bothers him. He continues to tour and talk about his own philosophies, sort of mixed up in these stories of Orthon and in these stories of his connection and his communication with the saucer people and the pictures that he's taken. Then, in 1954, his wife, Mary Adamski, died. She's been absent from a lot of the reporting, a lot of the accounts, even his pseudo-autobiography, Flying Saucers Have Landed. He doesn't really make a lot of mention of her. What little we know about her is that she was a devout Christian, and she didn't really get along with Adamski's little compound of saucer believers that he was developing. Mm-hmm. It's likely that her death allowed Adamski to push the UFO narrative even further, which he immediately did. And you see this sometimes with, like, cult leaders. And I always think of Adamski as being sort of a cult leader light, right? Where, he doesn't prompt people to kill themselves. He's not really prompting people to do anything nefarious, right? But as soon as his tether to a more normal life disappears, he goes completely in the opposite direction.
That tends to be the case when it comes to cult leaders too, is like they lose a tether. Like it's either that their followers start to treat them like they're God, and that untethers them from the reality of being a mere mortal, or like something happens, something big.
Yeah, there's that event.
There is something.
Yeah.
But it seems like this guy, thankfully, George Adamski seems like a nice man.
He was.
Who was not homicidal.
And he had good philosophies, too.
Yeah, he seems to have, yeah. Mm.
So, a year after his wife Mary dies, Adamski released his second book, titled Inside the Spaceships, as opposed to Inside the Flying Saucers. And this time, he wrote this book solo. So the previous book, remember, it had started with the long, drawn-out, long-winded introduction that was written by Desmond Leslie.
Right. That
had a whole list of, like, these are an eternity of saucer contacts, right? This book is just Adamski's take on everything. The book opens with Adamski detailing a very strange encounter. On a whim, he checked into a hotel where he was greeted by two men in dark suits. They knew him from his saucer lectures, and they asked him to come with them. And being the very trusting soul that he is, Adamski let them drive him to an undisclosed location, even though you should never go to a second location, as we've learned from Poker Face.
Very true. Very true.
So during the ride, the men revealed that they are, in fact, aliens. One of them came from Mars, and the other one came from Saturn.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the other one came from Venus. And they just could not get along.
Yeah. Well, then one would have to be a woman, right? Because men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
I think that's this book, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The car stopped at a deserted stretch of desert. And they sat there and they waited for a couple of minutes. And then a saucer appeared on the horizon and descended next to the car. The door to the saucer slides open, and who comes out but Orthon, Adamski's old buddy.
Oh, right. He's got his CVS outfit on, his 1 hour photo bib.
Oh, right, the 1 hour photo, yeah.
Hi, my name is Orthon.
Hi, my name is Orthon. How can I help you today?
Ask me about our 5% discount on all toiletry items today.
So, remember that previously Orthon had communicated with Adamski through telepathy and hand gestures. But now, apparently, he's learned English, so he just talks to Adamski in English. And he says, "You want to come for a ride on my spaceship?" And Adamski's like, I've come this far. So he's like, sure, let's go for a ride on your spaceship. Inside the ship, Adamski found a circular compartment with a pole running vertically from the floor to the ceiling. This was apparently not for dancing, but was magnetized and somehow allowed the ship to fly through space through the use of magnetic polarity.
Did they find out afterward that it wasn't for dancing?
I mean, I assume that Adamski immediately did his routine on the pole, and they were
Right.
like, no, that's for magnetic polarity.
Not okay. Right. When I see a pole, I'm like, I gotta dance on that thing. It's
mean,
just
why
like
else
this
is it there?
drive to do it. It's just a human need. One time I was doing that at a club, and there was a pole, and a bouncer walked up to me and yelled at me because I was actually dancing on a plumbing pipe. And I'm sure,
Is this a real story?
This is a real story, and I'm sure that if the pipe had gone, if I weighed any more, I wasn't up on it.
I don't think you ever told me this
I wasn't
story.
like up on the pole. I was just like kind of grabbing it a little bit, and the guy was like, If I had pulled that thing harder, who knows what would have come out of that pipe all over the dance floor.
Oh my God.
It would have been very Blade, except instead of blood, it probably would have been like poop.
Disgusting water, yeah.
There needed to be a sign. This is not a dancing pole. This is a plumbing pole.
I can also imagine you there, like you're thinking you're like all sexy doing
Yeah,
the dance
yeah.
on the pole, and it's like, that's actually a sewer pipe.
Yeah. and you know me, I'm so nice. I was just like, cool, and I just kept dancing and walked away.
Oh my
like,
God.
Nobody saw that. Now everybody knows what happened. So I don't blame George. Let's just say he did that, and I don't blame him.
The walls of the craft were covered with charts and colored lights. The ship had a periscope, that they could like look out of the ship from the top, out of the top of the ship, with a large 6-row keyboard attached to it, which served as like the piloting mechanism. While Adamski continued his investigation of the interior, the ship just took off without asking him if he was ready.
Kidnappers.
They sort of were.
Yeah.
They were just kind of like, here we go.
Yeah.
And they flew to the Venusian mothership, which was the cigar-shaped ship that Adamski had captured on film before. Aboard, Adamski met 2 beautiful female aliens, tall, thin, and dressed in robes. One greets him with a kiss, the other with a glass of liquid.
This is a very male fulfillment story here. Sorry, straight male fulfillment story.
Yeah, seriously, right?
Yeah.
I almost feel like I should turn to my like romantic audiobook voice. Like, their names were Kalna and Ilmuth.
It's a perfect
Is that
romance voice. Yes. Nailing it.
Interestingly, the aliens, they keep a picture of their supreme being, who they call ageless life, on the wall of their living room of sorts in the mothership, which is very similar to the way that the communist leaders would keep, you would have pictures of the communist leaders in your house. Mm-hmm. These aliens explained to Adamski that they were traveling researchers and that their ships were capable of flying vast distances by quickly harnessing, quote, the currents of space. I don't know what that means. Physics doesn't really explain what that means. And unfortunately, George Adamski, uneducated individual, doesn't really understand enough to ask questions and really get the physics of everything that happened to him here.
Well, one uneducated person to another. I mean, could this be magnetic fields?
It certainly could be. I get the sense that magnets were really mystical at that time, and like magnets were kind of fulfilling a lot of void, the same way that we did with nanomachines for a while, and now we're kind of doing it with AI.
Oh, yeah.
Where if you need a solution, now we're just like, oh yeah, it's an AI thing. Mm-hmm. And then like for the last decade or so, it was all nanomachines. We're like, we'll just build it out of nanomachines and blah, blah, blah. And then I get the sense that in the 50s, 60s, it was magnets.
Yeah, the mystery of magnets.
Fix it, yeah. So the aliens, they keep Adamski supplied with refreshments, this liquid that he's drinking. And he listens to a lecture given by a, quote, master, which Adamski quotes in the book, and I'm going to quote here. "My son, our main purpose in coming to you at this time is to warn you of the grave danger which threatens men of Earth today. Knowing more than any amongst you can yet realize, we feel it our duty to enlighten you if we can. He went on to explain that the aliens had been alerted to Earth's nuclear bomb testing and the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. He says, if, however, mankind on Earth should release such a power against one another in full warfare, a large part of Earth's population could be annihilated, your soil rendered sterile, your waters poisoned and barren to life for so many years to come. It is possible that the body of your planet itself could be mutilated to such an extent that would destroy her balance in our galaxy. And they explained to him that the only viable way forward was through peace and through, guess what?
Science?
Universal law.
What does that mean?
Well, that's the phrase that they use to describe their view of the world. And just so happens to be the same phrase that Adamski has been preaching over glasses of homebrewed wine 2 decades earlier.
Oh, just a coincidence.
What a coincidence!
Total coincidence. Although, honestly, I completely love what this alien person / George Adamski is saying. And I think that I don't really care how the message how the message is served. I'm like, it's a good message.
Concepts are the same, right?
Yeah.
Like humans all possess the urge to reach enlightenment, but they're shackled by the habits of everyday lives, meaningless distractions around them. And in order to ascend, you got to throw these aside. You got to focus on the holy path of companionship, of expression, kindness. All things are connected. Our actions touch everyone around us, even the people we can't see. This alien is repeating everything that Adamski has said 20 years prior. After this lecture from the master, Adamski attended an alien banquet, which was followed by dancing before his host returned him to Earth.
Oh, that's lovely.
So they fed him.
Yeah.
They danced with him, not around the pole.
No poles.
And then they returned him to Earth. And upon returning him, they promised to continue visiting him and keep explaining their philosophies to him so he can disseminate it to the Earthlings.
I have nothing to say to that. It's just basically, I honestly don't care how the message is put out. It's a good message. Don't bomb each other to death.
And remember, this is basically the same thing that we saw just a couple of years prior in The Day the Earth Stood Still. Alien comes to Earth, has this same message: love each other, be peaceful. It's even sort of the same setup. It's like, look, your bomb alerted us. Your growing military prowess alerted us and made us say, hey, we better check out this planet, make sure everything's okay there.
Mm-hmm. You can really see where this is all coming from.
Yeah. Later that year, he's contacted again, gets aboard this ship from Saturn. And while aboard, they lecture him about their supreme deity and how world peace is necessary to keep the Earth alive. They say, we understand love as a radiation from the heart of the deity through all creation, especially through man toward all other forms without division of any kind. And when they talk about man, they mean mankind, not gender. Man.
Okay, yeah.
Now that your scientific knowledge has so far outstripped your social and human progress, the gap must be filled with urgent haste. Men of your Earth know the terrible power sealed within the bombs they are piling up for use against one another. Yet they blunder on, even nearer to the brink of an unthinkable worldwide slaughter. This, to us, is strangely illogical. Very Spock.
It does. That wasn't out yet, though. That was the 60s,
Oh, no.
right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, okay.
Adamski's repeated interactions with these masters reads like a Buddhist text. In fact, the whole thing it's dripping with this pseudo-esoteric dogma that he has gleaned and repackaged from Eastern philosophy. Remember that he was studying Madame Blavatsky and these other Eastern thinkers at the time. Much of this reinterpretation that we see in Adamski was also being done by Alan Watts in the 1950s. Do you know much about Alan Watts?
Have you mentioned him before?
Yeah, I have.
Here, that's the only way I would know him. Yeah.
Yeah, Watts was an ex-Episcopal priest who became fascinated by Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion. He wrote dozens of books on his approach to spiritualism, social identity, and he did a whole lot of drugs and experimentation as countercultural revolution of the 50s and 60s just exploded around him. Watts is probably best known for his book, The Way of Zen, which is a musing on Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophy. Published in 1957, just 2 years after Adamski's Inside the Spaceships, Watts is often credited with bringing Buddhism and Zen to the West and inspiring the hippie movement to re-examine their lives in society.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
So he's kind of a big deal.
Oh, absolutely.
Hippies.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is the birth of the hippie movement.
Ooh.
And
cool.
Watts is on the cusp of it, and he's the guy saying, okay, what are we doing? Why are we thinking in the way that we're thinking? We need to re-examine our lives. Mm-hmm. Remember that at this time, Western youth was living under the constant threat of chaos. Since the unparalleled destruction that closed World War II, atomic bombs, right? Mm-hmm. And with the perpetual threat of the communist uprising and nuclear annihilation, the future's looking pretty damn bleak for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Never mind that, say you're a kid growing up at this time, right? You're a teenager, young adult. Your parents, likely emotionally scarred veterans themselves, were toiling to death in factories and offices. They returned from war, right? Or at least being adjacent to war. They lived through it, is what I'm saying. Now you see them slowly dying in pursuit of financial wealth, which is something that they are desperately clinging to after the crippling Great Depression of their youth. Mm-hmm. So, simultaneously, Christianity is on the rise. A fear of the godless communists, quote, right, is being pushed by religious leaders to double their efforts to build and maintain Christian values. This means moral and sexual oppression and a drive for a society that exuded the idyllic 1950 family values, right?
Right, of the Western viewpoint.
The
right.
Western viewpoint, mm-hmm. right. What do we say all the time? Nothing exists in a vacuum, right? Mm-hmm. Counterculture rebels against all of it. Enter the hippies. Mm-hmm. There's easily 3 more episodes of content here, but for the sake of brevity, we're going to bring it back to aliens. All right. But it's important to be aware of the current state of Western society, I think, because Adamski's universal law, as expressed by these alien masters, fits right in with the burgeoning countercultural movement. Adamski, this 64-year-old Polish guy, was creating the building blocks for the early hippie ideas without even knowing it. But Adamski himself, he's not without his detractors. Enter James Moseley, one of the first UFO researchers in history.
Really?
So this is not a guy who had encounters. This is a guy who's like, I'm going to study UFOs. I'm going to study flying saucers and contactees.
Would you say that he was more on the skeptical side?
Let's get into it.
Okay.
Born in the middle of the Great Depression, Moseley's life was anything but meager. His mother died when he was 19, leaving him a trust fund that sustained him his entire life. He's a brash, sarcastic kid with a very keen sense of satire. And Moseley did what any newly rich person does. What would you do if you were 19 years old, suddenly inherited your trust fund, and you could do anything in the world? What would you do?
I would buy land and live in the center of it and say, get off my property!
What do you think Moseley did?
Well, I think he, well, it depends. Like, was he interested in UFOs at that point?
No.
Oh, I don't know. Probably, but he was satirical and he was like that. He probably bought a newspaper.
Moseley started robbing graves.
Oh. Wow.
Seriously, he started robbing graves. He spent a few years traveling Central and South America, digging up pre-Columbian grave sites for antiquities, and then tried to sell them in Key West.
Oh, so he wasn't going down to the local grave yard.
No, he almost lived like an Indiana Jones kind of lifestyle.
Except
not funded by a museum, just funded by his own...
by his
excitement.
And also this like weird white manifest destiny angle of I have a right to all of these
I'm not sure
old
that
dead bodies.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Mosley would have said that he had a right to it. I think that Mosley just needed something to do, and it provided something to do. I think he knew full well that what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah, I would, and he did it anyway. Okay, That sounds about right.
Eventually, he was somewhat unsuccessful selling his ill-gotten gains, and so he donated them to the Graves Museum of Archaeology and Natural History in Florida.
Okay.
And got bored. And during this post-archaeologist boredom, Mosley's interest was piqued by the growing flying saucer stories. He had already well acquainted with traveling. He starts traveling the country, investigating claims of sightings, visitations, crashes, all of this stuff. He founded a magazine. Here's where your newspaper comes in. So he founded a magazine called Saucer News in 1954, which reported on, want to take a guess?
Roswell.
Flying saucer news.
Oh.
Yeah. UFOs, extraterrestrials, all the whole thing. Taking Mosley's own brand of wit and humor, the magazine was kind of a mix of investigative journalism, satirical opinion pieces, and practical jokes, often in the form of like hoaxes and outright lies. You see, Mosley found all these UFOs and flying saucer reports and their connections with extraterrestrial beings and other worlds just really damn funny. He became good friends with Gray Barker. Do you know who Gray Barker is? You should know this name.
That sounds like a very familiar name to me, but no.
So, Gray Barker is the origin of Men in Black, Mothman, and the Flatwoods Monster.
Origin meaning
he's the primary source of all of these.
Oh.
He's the one who was the first person to report on all of them.
Oh, wow.
So, we will devote an entire series to Gray Barker, who I think is one of the most fascinating figures in 20th century mythology. But understand that Barker and Mosley, they are pranksters.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think it's really coincidental that this guy, this one single guy, Gray Barker, happened to be there for these three huge...
Yeah, he wasn't present. He was reporting on them, I'll say that.
Oh, okay.
But
okay.
I think that a lot of times people bump into Gray Barker, like Gray Barker's name and his history and stuff like that, and they tend to take him as like, oh, wow, this was an investigative journalist who's breaking these cases, and we view it in that light. But this is something that Gray Barker said to a contributor to one of his journals. Okay, so this is somebody who was writing a piece for his journal. Gray Barker said, "Try to make it sound as technical as possible to make it look like a real scientific report. The real scientists who read our zine will see the hoax, and I hope they take it as a joke."
Oh no, and so of course it backfired. And the non-real scientist read it and thought it was all real.
Exactly.
God.
But you have these two guys who are on the cusp of the reporting, because there's not really a whole lot of saucer reporting outside of, clips in newspapers, right? But you don't have anyone who's really doing like quote unquote investigative journalism into this stuff, except for these guys, Barker and Mosley. And they're doing it snickering behind their hands the whole time, right? 1957, James Mosley tracked down a series of letters written by Gerald Baker. Now, Gerald Baker, you might recall him as one of the founding members of the George Adamski Foundation. And he was the one credited in Adamski's book, The Flying Saucers Have Landed. He had a photograph of one of the saucers. Baker's insight on the Adamski saucer experiences throw even more questions into the mix. He wrote in a letter to Mosley, 1, I did not take the brownie snapshot accredited to me. Basically, I did not take that photograph. Okay?
Why are they calling them brownies?
Oh, that was the camera he used.
Oh, okay, because
Yeah.
I was thinking he'd
That
made
was a
brownies into pictures. Okay.
No, that was the camera.
Okay, got it.
2, this was not the only brownie photograph taken. 3, George Adamski was the photographer, and the other brownie pictures were destroyed at his request by Lucy McGinnis, who was his secretary at the time. So, there were other photographs of the saucers that were destroyed. 4, the photograph was not taken on the date indicated. 5, the desert contact was pre-planned, and Adamski related the details to me of what was to take place there prior to the venture. So just a real quick recap of all of this. He didn't take the picture. There were other pictures taken by Adamski. They were not taken on the date that Adamski said they were. They were destroyed, and the contact was all pre-planned by Adamski.
Shocking.
So this raises a lot of questions. If the photograph wasn't taken on the date of contact, when was it taken and why? And what possible motive did Adamski have for destroying the other photographs, which undoubtedly would contribute to his story if it was true?
Yeah.
Baker goes on to use some colorful language about Adamski. What kind of imbeciles are we to pledge our support to such stories? Is not all this a corruption of the truth? I say it is. I know it is. I will not condone or support it any longer.
Ooh.
And in a final point, Baker mentions seeing something in Adamski's cabin that, quote, closely resembled a skeleton for a saucer mock-up.
Oh, wow.
And we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Okay.
But you have someone who was one of the founding members of Adamski's Saucer Foundation here coming out to Mosley, because Mosley's he's this investigator. He really, he's trying to get to the bottom of it, and he has a way of putting people at ease because he's a funny guy. You know, I think of Mosley as being something like a John Oliver type figure.
Oh, okay.
Where
if John Oliver had a weird early stint of digging up bodies.
Well, he might have. You never know.
We don't know.
Yeah. But that kind of, he's a little funny. He's got a lot of jokes in him, and he doesn't take anything that he's doing too seriously.
Okay.
And because of that, he's very disarming for these people that he's dealing with, and they're very willing to just speak the truth to him. James Mosley concluded that Adamski was nothing but a hoaxer and a fraud, and he wrote up an article in his magazine Saucer News that was a takedown of Adamski. But it seemed to not have a whole lot of effect on the man's career. Adamski continues touring the country, giving lectures, and repeats the same story of his fictional contact with the Space Brothers over and over again. Still, they're telling me these universal laws, I have to pass them down to you. This might have frustrated Mosley. He might have just thought that this is funny. It's not really clear what his opinion was of his unsuccessful takedown. But what we do know is that after it happened, he did what he does best. And he pulled a practical joke.
Uh-oh.
So,
Okay.
that December, just 2 months after his expose ran, a letter arrived in Adamski's mailbox. This was addressed to Professor George Adamski. Remember that he was uneducated. That was just a moniker that he used around the area.
Mm-hmm.
This letter came from the Department of State in Washington, D.C., and was signed by a Mr. R.E. Straith. And the letter said this: It will no doubt please you to know that the department has on file a great deal of confirmatory evidence bearing out your own claims, which, as both of us must realize, are controversial and have been disputed generally. While certainly the department cannot publicly confirm your experiences, it can, I believe, with propriety, encourage your work and your communication of what you sincerely believe should be told to the American public.
Oh boy.
The letter was signed in a generous hand by R.E. Straith of the Cultural Exchange Committee.
It must have been weird for George Adamski when he read that, because he knows in his heart, I think, that all of this is fake.
Oh, I mean, he had faked stuff, clearly. Yeah.
Right. So, like, it must have been a weird mind fuck for him to be like, this is real? And be like, am I accidentally a genius? Like, I don't know. Like, if I had gotten something like that in the mail that I had clearly made up.
It's a mind fuck, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I'd probably be like, you guys are fooling me. Or you can take it as another way and being like an ego boost and be like, I guess I'm just a genius.
Right.
Yeah.
And you see what happens as a result of this, right? Like, now you have two people on either sides of the spectrum. You know, the person who's trying to push the belief and the person who is laughing and making hoaxes. And they're both pushing the narrative forward.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
This happens all the time now. I mean, all the time. Like anytime you talk about it, you're pushing something forward.
Yes.
You're bringing it more into the forefront.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's a collective story that's being told now. That's even strengthened because it turns out that this was one of several letters postmarked in December of 1957. One went out to the Civilian Saucer Intelligence Group, one to the director of the Planetary Center, and one to the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Examining these letters, these saucer researchers from all these different disciplines confirmed that they were all written on the same typewriter.
And they were all supposed to be coming from different places? Is that what you said?
They were all supposed to be they were all supposed to be coming from different places, but all from within the US government. Despite his colleagues' skepticism, Adamski touted the letter as genuine. And he began using it as evidence that his encounters were in fact supported by the US government. This authoritative support gave Adamski the credibility he sorely needed, especially after Moseley's takedown of him.
You know what? I bet you that Adamski didn't believe it for a second. I bet he thought it was a hoax. Like the letter was a hoax and a joke, and he was like, I'm going to use this to my advantage.
He's a shrewd guy. I wouldn't put it past him.
He seems very smart, and Moseley's just hitting his head against the wall like, damn.
So then, to make matters worse, or better for Adamski, the government didn't know what to fucking do about it. And so people started calling up and asking to speak to Mr. Straith, and they would be told, oh, he's not available, or he doesn't exist. And all this creates a conundrum, right? Because someone with intimate detail of Adamski's experience wrote that letter. Why was the State Department hiding their agent? Were they hiding their agent? Was it a pseudonym? Was it a top secret surveillance organization? And
wow.
Remember, like, this is the height of the Cold War, right? Everybody's already shaking the bushes looking for communists. We've got deals being done in dark alleys. We've got microfilm cameras, poison-tipped umbrellas, lipstick pistols, like all of that stuff. It's no surprise that the story spun into a mysterious government agency keeping tabs on UFO contactees. Because we were so primed to believe that there was this secret espionage occurring all over the place.
Do you think that to the U.S. government, all of this alien talk and all this love talk and stuff is kind of a communist leaning? And they wouldn't like that?
It could have been. I don't know that the government actually had that much interest in Adamski. I don't think that they thought he was much of anything. Because in reality, they did not have a whole lot of contact with him at all. They might have been keeping tabs on him because of this, that was a communist idea. But if they were, it didn't amount to anything.
I would think that at that time there might be some people keeping an eye on people who go around and talk about loving each other and not going to war, and
there might have been.
I don't know. Like I feel like if you have an audience, they probably were like looking a little bit, maybe a little bit.
If there were, I don't think we have any information on what that
evidence.
operation was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had to have a higher clearance to.
Nothing substantial happened from it. We can say that, right?
Yeah.
Nothing substantial happened.
Right.
Yeah. Now, Adamski is leaning hard into this notion too. Government agents came to see him at one point, and they told him, "You got to stop using this letter as evidence because it's not real, and if you don't, we're going to take legal action against you."
Wow.
And Adamski spun that threat, and he said, "Oh, now the government's trying to keep me quiet."
Oh my God.
And he went to his grave claiming that the Straith letter was genuine.
Smart guy, I think. I don't think
Just lean into it, dude.
Yeah, I don't think he's a duped guy here
Yeah.
at all, but
And
that's just my opinion. But.
In case it wasn't very clear, the Straith letter was not real. In 1985, after Gray Barker died, James Moseley came forward and revealed the truth in his new magazine called The Saucer Smear. He said, on one particular occasion in 1957, a young friend of Barker's provided a pack of genuine official stationery from various government agencies. Barker and I wrote not one, but 7 naughty letters that evening, emboldened by the evil of alcohol, and fully enjoying the hilarity of this chance to throw long-term confusion into the UFO field.
Oh my God. Just because they got some stationery.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
man.
Yeah, the letter is merely a prank, right? But its unforeseen side effects skyrocketed Adamski's credibility
Oh my God.
into the stratosphere. Like, in 1959, he launched a world tour. World tour under the moniker Professor Adamski, which is just what he's calling himself all the time now. I'm Professor Adamski. I'm going to tell you about the Space Brothers. He filled all 2,200 seats of the Wellington Hall in New Zealand. He lectured in Australia, then he flew to England and spoke with Air Chief Marshal Lord Dowding. He met with Queen Juliana of Amsterdam before continuing to The Hague and
my
Rome.
God.
With the US government unwillingly backing him, Adamski became almost like a guru on stage. Interview after interview, he's just nailing them.
So all these people, like Queen Juliana or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yes.
they all believed that the U.S. government was backing him.
They all met with him.
So they must have thought there was some serious credibility going on here.
You have to remember, dude, he's been doing this since the 20s. He's got going on 30 years now of experience talking about his philosophy and dodging those questions.
Totally, yeah.
Colin Bennett, in his biography on Adamski, says this: he was a master magician for whom cleverness was a mere affectation. As a teacher of theosophy for many years, he was bound to know that the merest scrap of effective description at the right time and the right place acts like some science fiction creature. It can rapidly clone itself, and, like the joke, there is no possibility of escape from its clutches.
Oh, wow. Smart guy.
So then, in 1962, Adamski announced that, I want you to get ready for this, he had gone to a conference on Saturn.
Amazing.
Seriously. Here, on Saturn, he and a council of other Earthlings and extraterrestrials discussed important matters like how the sun was slowly leaving its orbit. And after discussing this, they seemed to conclude that the best course of action was to do nothing, and adjourned. So, even on other planets, government does basically nothing.
Right.
What's most interesting to me is that this account gets left out of the more credulous biographies and narratives of Adamski's life. And probably with good reason, right? Mm-hmm. The man's 70. He's clearly losing his ability to give a fuck, and he's doubling down on his stories and his atrociously incorrect science.
Totally. Is he making money here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's doing pretty well.
Oh, he
for
got
himself.
paid for all of these lectures, yeah. Mm-hmm. He did a world tour.
Okay. Yeah,
Plus,
yeah.
he's selling books.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is not without its fringe benefits here.
And I think at the core, he really did believe in his philosophy, and he wanted to spread it.
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of like, well, he did a lot of damage in not helping people critically think about anything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, he wasn't saying terrible things.
And he's speaking to a philosophy that people are already beginning to adhere to. Totally. This is the hippie movement.
Right.
We're 1962 now. Like, we're starting to really see that burgeoning.
Mm-hmm.
Just before, by the way, do you understand why you couldn't go to a conference on Saturn?
Well, if you went there, if you actually went there in your spaceship, the rings would hit your spaceship and you'd bounce.
Oh, is that how it is?
What would happen is the magnetic fields would take your ship and you'd spherically go around and you'd actually become one with the rings.
I see.
And so this is what happens with a lot of aliens that try to reach Saturn is they become one with the rings. So that to me is proof that conference never happened.
I want all of our listeners to understand that none of that is true. That is horrendous science.
I'm just telling you what the aliens told me, okay?
Saturn isn't a solid planet, right?
Okay, yeah, totally, yes. I know that.
It's a gas giant.
I knew that. Yeah, I knew that.
It's mostly comprised of hydrogen and helium.
Yeah.
It might have a nickel or iron core, but it's impossible to tell because the pressure is so intense that it literally forces the surrounding hydrogen molecules into a liquid. Like, depending on which atmospheric layer you're in, it's either negative 250 degrees Celsius or over 80,000 degrees Celsius. So, good luck with your meeting there, George.
Good luck. I can tell you though, like in all seriousness, there actually is a nickel core because that's what the aliens did tell me last night in my dreams. So
you're not helping. In 1963, Adamski claimed to have a one-on-one meeting with Pope John XXIII, shortly before the Holy Man's death. The only eyewitness account we have to any such meeting occurring is a report from Adamski's biographer, Louise Zistag. And even she could only say that she watched him walk away and then come back an hour later with a medallion. This was in Rome, so maybe. But the medallion, which Adamski claimed was given to him by the Pope, it shows the Holy Man's likeness on one side. It seems to be authentic. But during his own research, Mark Hallett discovered that it was one of a series of medallions being sold by Swiss banks. Now, Louise Zistag, his biographer, was living in Switzerland at the time, and so it seems like she should have made that connection. But she didn't. Again, this is all speculation. It might have been an oversight on her part, but it's another in the growing list of oddities and conundrums that surround George Adamski.
It's not too unbelievable that he would have met with the Pope if he had also met with like the Queen Julianne.
It's possible, yeah.
It could have been like one of the like the Keith Raniere and
the Dalai Lama.
Lama could meet up where.
Well, the things that Adamski's talking about, when you break them down to their core and you break down Christian ideology to its core, Catholicism to its core, they're not that dissimilar. You know, love people, gets wrapped up in different dogma a lot of the time, but that's basically what Jesus was saying.
Yeah, I mean, like, love each other.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, love each other, don't sell shit in my church. You know?
Yeah. All that like politicized crap is what we've put on it over the years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
At some point during the late 1950s, Adamski acquired a Bell & Howard 16mm camera. Ready for our tangent into film?
Oh yeah, buckle up. Here we go.
16mm film was an awesome development for amateur filmmakers because it printed a positive, not a negative. This is also called reversal, and it simplified the development process. There were far fewer steps between filming with a camera and putting it in a projector, and that was great for hobbyists. Mark Hallett, in his critical appraisal of George Adamski, collected several different films Adamski shot during the 50s and 60s. Using rudimentary film tricks, he created several saucer videos of varying quality. One of Adamski's most common tactics when he was making his saucer films was to take a piece of glass, like a window pane or something like that, and attach a small saucer to it. This could be something that he had on a piece of paper, flattened, that he hand drew or something like that. Or it could be a 3D object too, like a model. He would then film through the camera and hold the glass sheet up in front of it, close to the lens. And it would give the impression that the saucer was flying through the air overhead. And he could position the saucer in the sky. By moving the glass around, he could even manipulate the trajectory and the path of the saucer, although this would sometimes make it distort if he moved it too far away or too close to the camera's lens.
Smart.
It's a very common technique.
Okay.
The other technique is what's called a double exposure, one of the classics of cinema, right? This involves shooting an image once, exposing the film once, then shooting again with the very same frames. And this can produce some really cool effects, like the beginning of True Detective. The credit scene of True Detective is a double exposure where you see like the half of his face and then the other half is like a different image and that sort of thing.
So cool, yeah.
Double exposures have been around since basically cameras existed. Early examples of this technique were used by spirit photographers to make unseen ghosts appear on developed negative. And you know the best part of this?
No.
You can do it secretly. So what you do is you shoot a person dressed as a ghost in private the day before, and then you bring the camera to your seance and you shoot your subject on the same negative, and then you develop the film. And just like that, a ghostly image mysteriously appeared on your negative.
Oh my God, no way.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That must have freaked some people out.
Oh, it totally did.
Big time.
Yeah. We have reason to believe that Adamski used this technique in 1965 on the famous Rotifer film, also called the Silver Springs film. Adamski had been staying with friends, Nelson and Madeline Rotifer, in Silver Springs, Maryland. On Friday, February 26, 1965, while Nelson was away at work, Adamski and Madeline were contacted by the Space Brothers. But I don't know how. They might have contacted Adamski directly.
You keep saying the Space Brothers, and in my head, immediately all I get is the Property Brothers. And they just look like the Property Brothers. They just walk up and they're smiling.
They got their tool belts on.
Yeah, they're dressed
like,
exactly
hey,
the same.
Hey,
and they're clean.
Adamski, we're going to contact you. We're going to take a look at your house. We're going to see if we can make some renovations to your house.
Yes, that's what we're going to do. And these guys never touch a hammer. Like they're just like it's amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I cannot help but think of them. Okay.
Great. So the Space Brothers, not the Property Brothers, the Space Brothers, they come in and they say, oh, there's a saucer that's about to fly by. Adamski says to Madeline, oh, there's a saucer that's about to fly by. Get your camera and let's go watch it. Madeline had a Bell & Howard Model 315 8mm camera. This was fitted with a zoom reflex lens, specifically a 9 to 29mm f1.8. It had a film magazine in it, which was balanced for indoor shooting, likely ASA 400 at 3200 Kelvin color temperature, which gives correct colors under incandescent bulbs. Okay, what all that means for my uninitiated non-film listeners is that this camera was designed for indoor shooting. If you take that camera and you film outside with a camera that is balanced for indoor shooting, you're going to get an image that tends more toward the blue color tone. As opposed to if you took a camera that was balanced for outdoor filming and brought it inside, you would end up with an image that is more yellow. Okay. The camera was an auto load, which I believe means that it took a magazine rather than a film roll. So think of it kind of like sticking a VHS tape into the camera. There's still film in the magazine, but it's contained in this single housing that makes it easy to transport and protects it from accidental exposure.
Yeah.
The thing about these housings is that they make it really easy to rewind the film. Now, during the excitement of shooting, Madeline couldn't get the camera working properly. Not wanting to miss the shot, Adamski took over and he filmed the saucer with her camera, which the saucer was hovering nearby. Excitedly, they rushed to have the film developed. And it clearly shows a flying saucer, which kind of moves and jumps around the frame at a distance before coming closer. You can see the 3-ball landing gear. You see that kind of change, which could be extending or contracting, or it could be distortion. And it's really, really clear. You saw this.
Yeah,
it's really clear.
My question, though, is that did she see it with her naked eye as well?
We'll never know. Madeline swears she saw a saucer. Silver Springs, Maryland is less than 30 miles from Andrews Air Force Base, which means they could have seen a military craft. Colin Bennett, in his book Looking for Orthon, notes that Madeline's leg was in a cast after an accident, which calls into question if she could have even made it out onto the porch in February. So what is most likely is that Adamski shot a plate of the saucer on her 8mm camera, then either rigged the camera to be inoperable or relied on her inexperience. Remember, she had gotten it as a Christmas present, so she had only had it for 2 months. Taking over, he double exposed the film, this time live and looking up into the sky. And the double exposure superimposed the saucer above the trees, creating the iconic film. The circumstance surrounding this film is just another unanswered question in the Adamski legacy. What we do know is that the craft in it is almost certainly not a flying saucer claimed to be 30 feet across. The distortion, the overlapping trees, and the erratic movement all show that this is merely a double negative exposure, a final piece of Adamski's trickery.
It looks like a lamp.
We're going to talk about that in just a second.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Don't forget about the prop that was claimed to be in Adamski's garage, right?
Yeah, right.
This film, Adamski, he likely wanted this to be the ultimate piece of evidence that would finally silence his skeptics, but that never came to pass. On April 23rd, 1965, George Adamski died of a heart attack.
Oh.
He was cremated and buried in Arlington National Cemetery because he was a veteran.
Yeah.
In a message sent to his followers, his longtime companion, Alice Wells, remember she owned the diner that Adamski was working, she writes, "Our lives are richer for knowing George Adamski, the man, for he shared his understanding of cosmic intelligence with all who would listen. And now, as he lives in a greater field of service, may we as mortals be ever mindful of the symbol of life for which he so unselfishly lived and died. His name is a symbol of hope, of understanding in the midst of confusion, a promise of happiness and life eternal when nature's cosmic laws are obeyed. Amen." 4 years after Adamski's death, Neil Armstrong stepped off a lunar module and onto the surface of the moon. He found only a barren landscape. No Space Brothers greeted him. Adamski left behind a legacy of media and stories that his followers and detractors analyzed for decades. His flying saucer reports and pictures helped to shape the face of mid-century science fiction. Spacecrafts radically similar to Adamski's designs pop up in Forbidden Planet, Lost in Space, Independence Day, The X-Files, and even overseas as Godzilla's ex-alien antagonists. This design was echoed by Bob Lazar during his alleged work at Area 51, even down to the triplet anti-gravity landing gear. In 2012, Joel Carpenter published a lengthy essay, Preliminary Notes on the Adamski Scout Ship Photos. He addressed the similarities between Adamski's saucers and the Art Deco lamps at the time. However, he found too many inconsistencies in the lamps. And so Carpenter finally determined that the photos were faked using the top of a gas lantern, likely coming from Sears. Joel Carpenter's comparison photos will be included in the show notes. Have I shown you this before?
I think you.
Okay.
I think you have.
Just in
but
case.
Show it to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh
yeah.
Right. So you can see. I mean, even the hole for the handle is there.
Yeah. It is. It's even that, and the way that the little holes, the window holes, are laid out.
Yeah, the portholes, what they would call it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. He probably painted it. It looks like he painted it. You know, and he looks like he attached some type of balls to the bottom, golf balls or ping pong balls or something like that, but it's pretty clearly that lantern. Yeah. The Adamski Foundation refutes this claim, but I think it's pretty obvious that the scout ship is nothing more than a mocked up lantern top. it is not surprising to me that this would be the thing that was cited in George Adamski's garage by Gerald Baker back in the day.
Yeah, because he said he saw
a
mock-up
something,
of something.
which is probably that.
Yeah.
There's one more piece to this puzzle, and that's a briefly published fictional manuscript dated around 1949 titled Pioneers of Space. This went to presses just 4 years before Adamski's first contact with Orthon, okay? To put it in perspective in the timeline. We know that it was out of print less than a decade later because, as Mark Hallett reports, a request for a copy in 1958 was denied by Adamski himself. This would be shortly after the publication of Adamski's second book. We know that it was written around 1944 because Ray Palmer of Fate magazine and Amazing Stories, he recalls receiving a submission from Adamski that he ultimately rejected.
Okay, so this fiction was written by Adamski.
This fiction was written and submitted to Ray Palmer's magazine by Adamski.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Publishing's a hard business.
Tell me about it.
Pioneers of Space was written by Adamski and ghostwritten by Lucy McGinnis, his secretary. Although it's exceedingly difficult to find a copy, Mark Hallett summarizes several key points from the story. In Adamski's manuscript, 4 Earthlings are visited by people from space who offer them a free ride in their spacecraft. These extraterrestrials communicate telepathically, come from Venus and Saturn, and follow the guidance of a supreme intelligence. The ship is powered by magnetic polarity. The Earthlings listen to philosophical lectures, attend a banquet, and watch the Space Brothers dance before being returned to Earth. Mark Hallett mentioned that Pioneers of Space received, quote, negligible literary success, which seems like a very polite way to say that nobody fucking read it. It's not a leap in logic to see that Adamski repackaged his fictional Space Brothers visit with his pseudo-Eastern philosophy and sold it as a new kind of religion, one sermonized from extraterrestrial visitors. For decades, he'd been trying to find a niche for his belief structure. First as a sage from the Royal Order of Tibet, then as a fiction author, and finally as a UFO contactee. Seeing that the public latched onto the idea of aliens more than philosophy, Adamski doubled down and made himself into a space brother by proxy, riding on their crafts, seeing literal stars, and learning their teachings so that he could pass them on to his followers. Adamski's life was never free from war. First as a young man fighting a proxy war in Mexico, then through the stories of the Western Front and Pacific Theater in World War II, then the atomic blasts that leveled cities and the whispered rumors of communist occupation, along with the threat of mutual nuclear destruction. Adamski took comfort in his own stories of peaceful space beings, ones that had evolved beyond our petty conflicts with our fellow man. I think Adamski was a fraud. Yes, and not a particularly good one. But I think he continued maybe the truest human legacy, the curious desire to explore the world around us. Despite his trickery, his lies, and his hoaxes, Adamski did what generations have done before him. He built his own mythology, no different from Orion or Shen Zhusu or Yad al-Juza. Orthon and the Space Brothers, with their enlightened teachings, fit perfectly in the pantheon of sky gods. They became their own religion, one not of gods and monsters, but of high-tech flying saucers and hyper-advanced alien visitors. Because, after all, is religion anything more than just a way to find meaning in the emptiness of our universe? To look up at the innumerable stars in the sky and break their enduring silence by crying, "I'm significant." And that's the story of George Adamski.
Ah, very nice. Oh, that's great. I'm significant and I'm worth being alive. Like
Right.
my life is worth something.
Right.
Because I think that when you see so much war, like yeah, his whole philosophy was just, we're all valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Everything's connected.
everything's
Every life
connected.
matters.
Yeah.
Yep.
I also really like the notion, this was way earlier in the episode, but our technology advanced faster than our humanity.
That was the supreme being, I think. Yeah.
Right, so him.
The master, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's definitely like, it's there in all of this. It's there in the horror of war and in the horror of the atomic bomb and all this stuff. It's like, we have to leave a piece of our humanity behind to push technology forward. We don't have to, but we do. And so here we are. And then you have this counter pushback of things like George Adamski, who want us to remember our humanity.
Yes.
And we remember it through things that are not human, which is kind of awesome. It's a very poignant story, despite the fact that now there are people walking around believing that it's like we know what he did was real. But
What's funny is that I think when we talk about Kenneth Arnold and Roswell and the originators of a lot of these, Adamski gets forgotten. I think a lot of times, and part of that is because so much of what he has done has been disproven and no longer makes sense. Because, like, obviously there's nothing on Venus, and obviously you can't go to Saturn for a conference and all of that. And that's not to say that there aren't still people who believe him, because the rhetoric that surrounds Adamski now is that Adamski faked things in order to communicate his message, but he was a legitimate contactee.
okay.
So that's the story now, is
Sure.
that he actually was contacted by the aliens. Yes, he faked some photos, but the stories are true.
Okay.
And maybe he didn't go to Saturn. Maybe he instead just was in the middle of the asteroid belt or something like that.
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
so it kind of gets explained away that way. But it was really remarkable to me how few people talked about him when I was doing my research. And how, Gray Barker is a name that everybody sort of knows and everybody talks about. But Adamski is this forgotten person. He was such an influence on me in my youth. And his photos were so influential for me that I really wanted to be able to devote a lot of time to him and really talk about his story and talk about his influence. Because truth be told, right, if it wasn't for Adamski, you don't have Moseley going so hard at flying saucers. If it's not for Adamski, you might not have Moseley and Gray Barker writing letters that become the genesis of the Men in Black. Because that's what those letters were, right? They were the beginning of the Men in Black mythology.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And if not, we wouldn't have Independence Day.
We wouldn't have we wouldn't have Independence Day. Those, if you look at not the big ships that destroy the cities, but the little crafts that they're flying around, those are 100% just variations of the standard flying saucer model, which was created by Adamski.
Right.
That design is pretty much from him.
Man.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have Independence Day, Men in Black. I mean, Will Smith's career would be like...
What would he do?
What would he be doing?
Poor Will Smith.
Will Smith. I just want y'all... Will Smith should thank George Adamski, honestly.
You're going to end up with more Wild Wild West.
Right.
So think about that.
Think about that, guys.
Yeah. All of our... I mean, even the X-Files, dude. You look at the poster that Mulder has in his office, the I Want to Believe poster, it's not Adamski, but it is an Adamski style craft.
Sure,
It's basically a copy of an Adamski craft.
Yeah, and the opening credits are very...
The opening credits is the same deal. Like, it's all taken from this mythology, and it's a shame to me, it's disappointing to me that the man who helped to craft the mythology just kind of gets forgotten about, and we don't talk about him.
It's good. I'm glad you did. I like seeing it as a mythology, kind of the same as any of the old other mythologies out there.
I think so. Yeah. To me, that is not that far different from, as I said, just looking up in the stars and telling stories about gods.
Yeah.
And you see it. We will talk about this in the future, because I do want to do a couple episodes or a couple series at least on ancient aliens and things like that.
Please.
The different sites and all of that. And I think it's really interesting to see the evolution of how we used to talk about them as gods and now we talk about them as aliens. Yeah. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that.
In the future. In the future, we will talk about that. We will do that. But that will not come in the next series that we do.
What's the next? You don't have to say it, but give me a hint.
It's going to be a complex story. Things might get a little hairy.
Literally?
Literally. We're going back to cryptids. Things might get a little hairy.
Interesting.
Things might get a little cold.
Interesting. Okay, I literally am not joking. I have no freaking idea what we're doing next, so I'm not being playful.
It's gonna be a surprise for everybody.
It will be. Total surprise. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our series on George Adamski and for allowing me to finally get to talk about someone who, like I said, was a gigantic influence on me and my interest in the paranormal, the supernatural as a child. It's been a blast, and I'm looking forward to getting back to cryptids with everybody.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have a great next series. So, yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, be safe out there, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters. If you like the podcast and what we do, please share it with others or leave us a rating and review. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.